join me for another walk. I don't know. I've been thinking about coping mechanisms. Especially, like, if you're trans, you already know this, but if you're not, the world kind of is against you if you're trans. You know, you kind of have to be that person that you have to prove innocence. Like, it's literally like a witch hunt of everyone assumes that you're out to hurt them, or you're out to, like, be a sexual deviant. Ooh, or, you're out to, like, do harm to somebody, or for personal gain, or something like that. It's stupid. I don't know why anyone would choose that for, like, what personal gain do you get? You lose things when you transition half the time. Like family. But, like, rights. But anyway, like, you know, someone was mentioning to me that while they love and care for their friends that are trans, and their family members or whoever, that they truly believe in their heart that it's a coping mechanism to deal with past trauma, to be able to deal with past abuse. And I'm going to sit here and tell you, I understand their concern. I disagree. And it sounds bad because so I've had past trauma and abuse, and I know a lot of people have as well. But you have to remember, people who are already oppressed are more likely to be abused because they already are lacking in power. And abusers are people that are either in power or trying to get power back. They lost it somehow and trying to get it back. And the people who are being abused, 99.9% of the times, are people that are not in power. Women, children, minorities, immigrants, LGBTQ. None of those people really have any power, societally. You know, I know half y'all are going to come up with a random, like, nerd example of, well, women have power here. Yeah, shut up. In general, women don't have power, children don't have power, and that's why they're more likely abused. So, like, going off this idea of coping mechanisms, a coping mechanism is something that you use as a person to survive a situation. And, like, survival could mean many things. It could be, I just gotta survive till lunchtime through this class, so my coping mechanism is to, like, drift off into space mentally, or something extreme of, like, I'm getting raped, and so my coping mechanism is to disassociate. Been there. I've been there. Half the time you don't even realize it's happening. But here's why I don't think transitioning is a coping mechanism. Because that would infer that you are coping with something very painful, something very harmful to you in that moment. But being trans is not a moment-to-moment thing. Coping is drinking. You know, when something happens, I'm going to go drink something. Or coping is, I'm feeling stressed, so I'm going to draw. Or I'm going to go for a walk. Coping good and coping bad are very thin lines. But, you know, coping isn't changing your diet. You know, you're changing your diet completely, or you're starting a new exercise routine. Yes, those things can turn into negative coping mechanisms when you start hurting yourself, but they're assumed to be lifelong changes, which is not coping, because coping, again, is a temporary thing that's helping you get through a moment, helping you get through an emotion, an instance, an act, something like that. So I don't think that being trans is coping, because if it was, half of us that were, like, coping by disassociating, we wouldn't have transitioned. Like, for years, I did everything I could to try to not transition. Hell, I learned how to read research papers, and I, like, purposely took assignments that would allow me to research trans issues and biological, like, how trans is located biologically, the changes, stuff like that. my one friend put it the best after I came out to her. She was like, Erica, you did everything you could to try to prove yourself that you weren't trans, and every single time your experiment failed. And I was like, well, shit. You're right. That's coping. Coping's trying to do something to try to prevent you from dealing with something that's in your past that you don't want to deal with. You know, like, I used to drink a lot, and that was to cope with an abusive ex and an abusive past, and also gender dysphoria. But, you know, I got the proper treatment for it. Transitioned. And I think that's the conversation no one ever wants to have. Gender dysphoria is one of the easiest things in psychology to treat. It really is. The treatment? Transition. And whatever that means to you, that's personal. You know, a transition could be a bunch of surgeries, it could be none. Whatever it means to you, it's still a transition. And, yeah, that's not a coping mechanism. That's a treatment. And it's fascinating how, like, it's seriously, like, one of the most successful treatments in mental health care. I think the percentage of people that detransition are, like, maybe in the less than 1%, maybe 1% at most. That means one person out of 100 is like, oh, this wasn't for me. I mean, you have better odds winning the lottery than being that one person. Let's look at the treatment methods and methodologies of all these other diseases and everything. I think the only other treatment that's, like, guaranteed to work like that is insulin for diabetics. Other than that, everything's a crapshoot. So no, I don't think that transitioning is a coping mechanism. I think it's a treatment. And are there people that transition and they realize it's not for them? Absolutely. Just like people try out different treatments when they are suffering from a medical condition. Oh, I have depression and this medication isn't working. I'm going to try a new one. Or this therapy style isn't working. I'm going to try a new one. But we're so quick to decry people of, like, you detransitioned. See, I knew that being trans was false. I'm like, all right, whatever. Again, let's talk about how much you know about medicine, because when you actually work in medicine, you understand that, like, most treatments are not that effective, or, like, there's a little bit of a guess going on, and it's an educated guess. I'm not saying negative things about, like, doctors or anything, but there's highly an educated guess. Highly. And most of the time it's a good educated guess, but sometimes it doesn't work. The 1%. But it's okay to have a 3% mortality rate as a surgeon. The patient literally dies during the procedure. That's okay. But having 1% of people that are trans detransition, it devalues all the rest of us. Again, let's talk about those biases and those discriminations. And if you know somebody or you know people that are like that, you can try to argue with them, but remember, human beings, we rationalize. Rationalizing doesn't mean logic. It just means that if we have a bunch of dots on a graph board, we try to draw the line between the dots as best as we can. And sometimes if we don't like how it goes, we're going to force it another way. Maybe sometimes by cheating and adding a couple more dots in. So rationalizing isn't logical. It's not factual. Everyone will claim, well, I know facts. Okay, cool. Again, we talked about it earlier. Facts are just commonly agreed concepts. Like research, science, it's always changing. Things are always changing in medicine, in psychology, mental health, socially. And it's the people that don't want to change that are causing the problems, because they don't like the change. It doesn't make sense to them, and it's scary. We never really talk about coping with fear. to cope with fear. Like, that's what people are doing now in COVID. Like, all these conspiracy theorists, all the people latching on to this idea of, like, oh, people are falsifying numbers, or, like, you know, ventilators, or I don't even know, and I can't keep up with it. I just, I actually, like, I did a research project in my undergrad on the same family of virus that COVID is, and it's a very deadly virus that has, like, it's called the Nipah virus, if you ever want to look it up, and it affects people in Bangladesh and Nepal and stuff like that, and it comes every year. Same symptoms, same issues. And the fact is, no one wants to admit that they're afraid. I'm afraid. I don't want to die. I'm also afraid for everyone else, for people I love and care about, for people that don't want to follow recommendations, for people that are not listening to experts. I fear for the state of our culture and our society, because I'm watching our culture just degrade itself in a way because no one wants to admit that they're afraid. And if they do admit that they're afraid, they'll come up with some rational idea to propose their original concept. So, for example, if someone believes in a conspiracy theory and you're talking with them about it and you're disproving it, and then you're like, well, you know, it just makes sense that you're afraid. Are you afraid? It's like, yes. So let's say the conspiracy theory is that COVID is a manufactured virus or something. And this person would be like, yes, I'm afraid that the people that manufactured COVID are going to manufacture another one. That's skirting that issue. Like, again, that counselor mindset of, like, I'm not a counselor, but, like, I had training for it, and I had education in a master's level, and it's like that, you know, people always like to skirt that issue because it's too raw to go right to the source. So they'll say I'm afraid, but they'll say they're afraid of something that they're not really afraid of, because to them it's safer. Because if people admit what they feel, it makes them vulnerable. Now, for emotionally healthy people, vulnerability is a good thing. Now, yes, you have to be guarded so people don't take advantage of you. But, you know, being emotionally vulnerable is showing you're human. I always find it fascinating. I mean, I was one of those people. I used to say, I don't have emotions. And I didn't. But then again, I didn't have emotions because I was disassociated the whole time, because I didn't want to accept the fact of who I was. So, I don't know. Coping mechanisms. There are a lot of different coping mechanisms in the world. And I'm sorry, but being trans and transitioning isn't one of them. If you disagree, go for it. Talk to me. Let me know what you think. I'm curious to hear your response. What coping mechanisms have you guys found for just stresses? COVID-19, school, transitioning, if you're cisgendered, like, or, you know, not heteronormative, if you have autism, ADHD, like what struggles are you coping with, and how are you doing it? And are you okay with them? You can be okay with a coping mechanism, and you can not be okay with it. Because it's all about you. There's no right answer there. But let me know. Keep in touch. Bye.